Hi, everyone. It's Chris. I'm a content developer and project management specialist here at N2K Networks. I'm also your host for this week's edition of CertByte, where I share a practice test question from our suite of industry-leading content and a study tip to help you achieve the professional certifications you need to fast-track your career growth in IT, cybersecurity, and project management. Today's question targets the Project Management Institute's Agile Certified Practitioner PMI ACP exam. PMI states that it is the industry's only agnostic, experience-based, ISO-accredited exam. It was updated on November 8th of 2024. PMI states that this cert is aimed at those who want to enhance their Agile mindset and skills. I have my teammate Steven here with us today as our guest host. How are you today, Steven?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Steven, what level of project management expertise would you say you are at?
Well, I come from a software development background, which means I'm usually the one being project managed, but I do have quite a bit of experience with Agile, so I'm in the neighborhood.
All right. So I am very interested to see how you'll do today. So, Steven, before we get into today's question, like I always do, I'm going to share a 10-second study bit for this exam for our listeners. Given you're our ISE2 expert, this may align with how some of your exams work. So my 10-second study bit for the PMI ACP is: the resource that is explicitly named as the primary study source for this exam is PMI's Agile Practice Guide. However, I recommend to cover all your bases and also study the Agile concepts that are part of the PMBOK 7th edition guide as well. Okay, now on to your question, Steven. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, here we go. So here is your question. This is scenario-based, and the names included here are only placeholders in this hypothetical situation. So here we go. You are the project manager and must determine how to best help Andrew complete his project tasks for the current sprint. Andrew chose tasks that are impossible for him to finish on his own. You assign Kelly to assist Andrew in completing the tasks. Which aspect of emotional intelligence did you just portray towards your team members? So, Steven, your choices are A, social awareness by the use of empathy, B, self-management by the use of self-control, C, self-awareness by the use of self-confidence, or D, social skills by the use of rapport building. So, Steven, before you answer and while you think this over, this question is from the new content outline for the exam, updated in November, as I mentioned. It falls under the leadership domain, under Task 1, empower teams, and further, the enabler that it maps to is apply emotional intelligence techniques to support the team, increase empathy, resolve conflict, and support positive influence. The leadership domain makes up 25% of the topics on the exam. All that said, would you like to talk me through your thinking of each of the options?
Well, I'm going to need to, because this is not a simple question and answer sort of question. So we're
Right.
going to go through this just like I would on the real exam, and try to maybe rule out a few, and then I'll
Okay.
make my selection here. So first one, there's social awareness by the use of empathy. It does look like the project manager perspective. You can see that the work will not get done. You feel like one of your team members may have overstretched. I'm kind of leaning towards that, but let's make
Okay.
sure that we cover all the ones, see if there's maybe one that's more specific. The second one there is self-management by the use of self-control. This is not related to work that I am doing, so I'm going to take the I out of this scenario and take that out.
Okay.
In terms of C, self-awareness by the use of self-confidence. Again, not about me, more about team members, and I'm gonna take the I out of that one as well. Which leaves me the last one, which is a little tricky. It seems kind of plausible to me. Social skills by the use of rapport building. But what I notice about the question is that there's no direct interaction between me and any of the team members, which means there really wouldn't be a chance for rapport building. So I think my instincts were correct. I'm going to go with a social awareness by the use of empathy.
Great job, Stephen. The correct answer is indeed A, social awareness by the use of empathy. I think your method of working through those is great. And I also think a funnel method is also good to use to understand the nature of this question more fully. So PMI incorporates the Agile Manifesto and mindset, which I will link to in the show notes. So they use that to set the foundational principles for which the PMI ACP is based. So part of developing an agile mindset is to leverage servant leadership as a term that most project managers have heard to benefit a team and their goals. A servant leader is typically the role of a project manager or even scrum master or anyone in a similar type role. So are you with me so far, Stephen?
I am, Chris.
All right, good. So the role of the servant leader is to empower the team in a nutshell. And one way that servant leaders do this is by removing impediments, blockers, whatever you want to call them, for their team. So you, Stephen, in this scenario, as project manager in an agile environment, is to do just that. So in this case, Andrew's blocker was that he gave himself tasks that he couldn't possibly complete. And by you showing that you understand and care enough about Andrew's workload to enlist some help and remove the blocker of his overwhelm in getting his tasks done, you are displaying empathy towards the situation and got him help with his tasks while keeping the sprint on track with no disruption.
Now, this makes a lot of sense. And in terms of the exam choices, the self management and self awareness, though, seem like they might be part of something like Agile Manifesto or a mindset that students might need to know about. Is that safe to say?
Well, yes and no. Yes, they should know these terms, and no, not all answers are part of the Agile Manifesto and mindset, but they have some overlapping emotional intelligence and servant leadership definitions. So let me explain. Now, self management and self awareness are terms that are well defined in the PMBOK Guide 7th edition rather than in the PMI Agile Practice Guide. That's one of the reasons my study bit recommended studying the agile aspects of the PMBOK for this test as well. So, addressing these in order of our answer choices. Self management has to do with a combination of a servant leadership aspect, an agile working approach, and an aspect of emotional intelligence. It involves being able to control and redirect feelings and impulses that are disruptive. Self awareness is an aspect of emotional awareness and servant leadership where a person has a level of understanding of their own motivations, goals, strengths, weaknesses, and emotions. This includes recognizing your stress triggers. Finally, social skills are an aspect of emotional awareness that also has to do with improving bonds among team members, and this is considered a culmination of all the other aspects of emotional intelligence as an umbrella term for how to best manage and motivate teams and how to relationship build. So, while there are factual elements present in each of these answers, empathy is the key word here that maps and tracks best to the scenario where you are showing empathy, which in a project management context has to do with understanding the needs and perspectives of the people who make up your project ecosystem.
All right. So, Chris, you did mention that this is part of a new exam update. Did PMI change anything in terms of qualifications for the exam versus the previous version? I ask because I know in my experience, sometimes this happens with other certification bodies.
Yes, and that's a great question. But in the interest of time, I will only cover one big change, which is in the previous version of the PMI ACP, they required 21 contact hours of Agile practice training, whereas now they require 28 hours of formal training in Agile practices, frameworks, and methodologies. But 21 hours will be accepted through March 31st, 2025. I will link to the new content outline that covers all the requirements in the show notes as well as in our upcoming blog. Well, thank you so much for being my project management test subject today, Stephen.
Thank you, Chris. I am actually really interested in the PMI certifications now. I'm going to check out the exam outlines next chance I get.
All right, sounds good. And as a note to our listeners, the practice test for the new version of the PMI ACP is in progress, and we will announce when it is ready for purchase. Also, for all of our PMI-based practice tests, we've added a new quick quiz feature to help you do some bite-sized study sessions whenever you're pressed for time. Well, thank you for joining me for this week's CertByte. If you're actively studying for this certification and have any questions about study tips or even future certification questions you'd like to see, please feel free to email me at certbyte@n2k.com. That's CertByte@n2k.com. If you'd like to learn more about N2K's practice tests, visit our website at n2k.com/certify. For more resources, including our N2K Pro offerings, check out thecyberwire.com/pro. For sources and citations for this question, please check out our show notes. Happy certifying!